Sup people, welcome to 1000 Words. My name is Radu, I'm a street photographer from Romania, and today we're going to take a look at RawTherapee, my RAW processor of choice. And what makes this video somewhat special is the fact that it's going to be an absolute beginner's first look into RawTherapee. A guide of sorts, a tutorial if you will. So if this is something that you find interesting, stick around. Now, I'm making this video for at least a couple of reasons. First of which is the fact that my brother, Mihai, has just started getting into wildlife photography, and he's very much a newbie at everything. So I thought this would prove helpful as a more structured, more so than I could probably do in real time, a more structured look into RawTherapee. And secondly, as far as I know, there doesn't seem to be any content geared to absolute beginners as far as RawTherapee goes. Now, RawTherapee is a very special post-processing program for several reasons. First of which is because it's my weapon of choice, and it has been so for the last 5 years or so. More importantly, it's free and open source, and even more importantly still, is that it can be as simple or as complicated as you'd like. Now, it can be as simple as allowing you to get a great image by just dragging a couple of sliders left or right, all the way down to PhD in mathematics level kind of complexity, because in some parts it's really complex and it can feel very intimidating, but all this apparent, and I'll give you actual complexity, kind of flies away when you start realizing, firstly, that there are multiple ways of achieving similar results. Some may be more complex, others can be very simple. And secondly, that you don't necessarily have to use every module, every tool in the program. Okay, so here we are on the RawTherapee website. This is where you download the program, and well, it is available for Linux, Windows, and macOS. The feature parity is 100%. I also made sure to download the very same version of the software that you are going to get if you click any of these links. Again, for complete feature parity, because while there are newer, more recent development packages with more recent work built into, and better and newer and more advanced modules and features built into the program, this is what's called the most recent stable version, and this is what you're most probably going to get. So while I'm not going to take you through the very installation of the program, I'm going to assume you know how to install the software. I'm just showing you the website, rawtherapee.com, and download the program. Once you've installed it, launch it, and first up we're going to take a tour around the interface and familiarize you with some of the interface, because while the software can be very complex, it's really somewhat easier to understand if you break it down into its constituent parts. It's built out of 3 main sections. First up, it's the file browser, and on the left side of the screen you have the Places window, where you have some predefined shortcuts and where you can also add your favorites. Just double click a folder and click the plus sign, and very obviously so, clicking the minus sign will remove that folder from your favorites. This is a recent folders list, which allows you to go to recently visited folders, a tree view of your actual physical drive. This main part here is where you see all your images, And I'm going to briefly explain what these tools do here, because you may find some of them quite necessary, some of them not so much. These buttons right here show or hide their corresponding panels. This is the button to clear all filters, and these are labels you may assign to your images, be them color labels, like this, color label green. And when this is assigned a green label, and this, let's say for the example's sake, is red, when you click on red, it only shows you red images. When you click on green, it only shows you green images. Now let's clear the labels by right-clicking on the images, and let's assign stars to them. Let's say this image is ranked as a 3-star. Just right-click and rank it 3 stars. This image is ranked 5 stars. This image is ranked 1 star. And use these stars to filter images based on their labels. Let's say I want to show all images that are 3 stars. Click on 3 stars. Use this button to clear filters and show everything. Let's say I want to show all images that are 5 stars. Click on this, and it shows you all images that are 5 stars. Click on this to clear all filters. Let's unrank everything and move on. This is a label that shows saved or unsaved images. We'll get to the saving part later, but it's useful to know which images you have exported to the hard drive and which you haven't. This shows the contents of the trash, which is currently empty, and this shows what is not in the trash. In order to assign images to trash, you either click the delete key on your keyboard or this little trash bin icon here in the upper right corner of the image, and you will see it now shows an open trash can with an arrow, which is to say these images have been assigned for deletion. The entire workflow of RawTherapee is non-destructive, so all edits, everything you do to the images is done via what's called a sidecar file, which lists all your actions. All your images will remain on the hard drive until you decide to delete them. So right now, while these may show they're in the trash, it says remove from trash, they're not yet deleted. In order to actually physically delete them from the hard drive, you need to go here, show the contents of the trash, and click the nuke button. It says right here in bold, permanently delete all files in trash. Right now, these images are just labeled as trash items. They're just assigned a label. They're not actually deleted. Let's remove them, remove the label from them, and move on. This shows several images, and it's really not very useful for the scope of this tutorial. It just shows images when you have several variants. The show info button shows the EXIF data, which is to say when it was shot, the name, the date, the time, exposure settings, shutter time, ISO settings, focal length, everything that's relevant to the exposure of the image. These buttons right here, obviously enough, make smaller and larger thumbnails. And this is about it. These things here have more to do with actual editing. And this is to crop using the thumbnail view. This is a rotation. You can flip the image, but we're just going to leave these aside and use them in the editor section of the program. Moving on the right side of the screen, there's a section with 4 tabs. This is filter, and you can filter images in this central view here based on any number of criteria you click here, be it aperture or shutter. Show me everything that's shot between 1/100 and 1/1 100. Show me everything that's ISO 250 to... And you can say here like 500, anything. Show me all images that are focal length 35 to 300. And you can filter images based on any number and a combination of criteria. The Inspect tab is really, really interesting because let's magnify this part here, and it's empty now, but it's really wonderful and helpful because once you hover over an image, look, it's magnified 100% view of the image. Without having to open it in the editor, you can quickly, at a glance, take a look at your image and check for details, anything you might want to see at 100% zoomed in view. Really great to easily check focus, check for details or whatnot. Batch edit is something we'll just very briefly mention and leave it at that. It does processing to multiple images at once. We'll not go into that because it's beyond the scope of this tutorial. Fast export, just like the name suggests, uses kind of like a script to export multiple images with settings of your choice. That out of the way, I have not touched upon this, and maybe perhaps I should. This is a full screen icon that makes your program go entirely full screen. This is the settings, and it's really not something we're gonna touch upon, but yeah, this is where you find the settings. This is a link to the Rawpedia, the RawTherapee manual, and oh boy, if you're ever into reading, there's a lot of info here. This is an ICC profile creator, and it's really advanced stuff to do with monitor calibration and mostly useful when printing, so let's leave it at that. This basically sums up the file browser part of the program. Let's quickly glance over the queue section, and this is where you send your images to be exported. You can either save your images one by one, export them to disks manually one by one, or just queue them up to be batch converted with some settings like where to put them into a specific folder and what file formats the actual exports should be, JPEG quality, subsampling quality, and whatnot. This is really simple and self-explanatory. You'll see once we're done with the images, you'll have a list here of images ready and waiting to be exported. This is the fun part. This is the editor window. There's a lot to talk about here, so I hope you're comfy. Grab a beverage of your choice, and let's first, before we actually start editing, and the proper term is processing, because in photography, editing actually means selecting images which are kept, which are thrown away, while processing means the manipulating and developing of the RAWs, which are basically digital negatives. Before getting into the processing part, let's yet again take a look across the interface, and then we have to define some terms. Top left part of the screen here, we have what is called a histogram, and I'll just very briefly say it's a mathematical graphical representation of the colors, luminosity or light levels in your image spread across. The very left part of the graph represents very dark shadows, also called blacks. Moving to the right is where the shadows are. Moving further to the right is where the midtones are. And right here at the very right of the graph, it's where the highlights are. We'll get into what everything means in just a bit. There's various ways to display histograms. There's also parades and waveforms, different ways to represent your image, but we'll not get into that. This is the navigator pane. Let's say if you're zoomed into your image, this red rectangle here represents the actual part that's visible to you. You can either use the hand to move this visible part in the navigator or just grab the image, considering you have this hand tool selected, which is by default selected, and move the image around to see it in detail. This number here will represent your zoom value. Right now you're zoomed into 200%. You can either use your scroll wheel to zoom in and out, or these buttons right here. Click the minus or plus signs to zoom in and out. Use this or the corresponding shortcut Alt F to zoom into the whole image, make it fit to screen. This fits to crop, but right now we haven't set any crop, so it will do nothing. And this is a 100% zoom, otherwise known as 1:1. Double clicking also resets the image to its fit to screen view. Just ignore these here, they're just color channel values, but it's not something we're going to touch upon today. This is what is called the history stack. And if I just randomly pull on sliders here, you'll see this has been populated with every action you have made. Everything you did to the image will be listed here, and it can grow quite a lot. This is very useful because you can always go back one or multiple steps into your workflow. You might feel like this is too much. You might change your mind. You might feel like you're not liking where the image is going. You just go back one or several steps, or just click on the photo loaded and go to the original image, how it was shot by your camera. The snapshots part here allows you to create sort of like presets of, let's use this for a use case scenario. Let's say this is your final process of the image, and you want to save these settings and try different process or different edit. I will be using the terms edit and process interchangeably, and I hope you don't find that confusing, but just for what it's worth, know that properly speaking, we're processing the image and the edit has been done in the file browser here where you're selecting images. But hey, let's just say editing also means processing. Let's just think of them as synonyms for simplicity's sake. Okay, let's say you kind of like this one. You click on the plus here and it creates a snapshot of all these settings here, all these settings here. You can double click to name it and say you want to call it Edit 1. Now, let's say you want to try something else and you've made this process of an image and you want to save this variant. You want to click the plus sign again to create another snapshot. See here, it's snapshot 2. Double click it, select your text or just delete it and name it Edit 2, for instance. Now you can easily, by just clicking on these snapshots, switch between edits and see which one you like best. You can have multiples of these, how many you like. I don't think there's a limit. Now let's quickly talk about some of the buttons around your image viewer here because some of them are quite important and you need to know what they do and how to use them. You might remember these buttons here from the browser view. They hide and or show their corresponding panels, allowing you for a very customizable workflow. Show what you need, hide what you don't, so very easy to work with the program in that way. This shows or hides the information, the EXIF data of the image. This toggles before or after view. You can use this in conjunction or just as a standalone way to show your image before and after processing. The hand tool is selected by default and it allows you to click and drag to move the image. The pipette here will allow you to click it and choose an area of the image for the white balance calculations here. We'll just leave it at that because we haven't touched on white balance. I think it's not something you should be mindful of right at the very beginning of your processing journey, because you're better off just leaving it on auto or just as shot. RawTherapee calls it camera, but if it says camera, it's as shot. This button is a lockable color picker and it allows you to have multiple selections of colors alongside with their corresponding red, green, blue channel percentages. And this is useful for many things, but I will just tell you what it does and not get into any details because it's not something we're going to touch upon today. This is the cropping tool. It allows you to crop your image. This is a straighten horizon tool. You will see it used later on. It allows you to just clear the crop. It allows you to specify a horizon line by clicking and dragging and drawing a line across your supposed horizon line, and the program will automatically straighten up your image in order to achieve a straight horizon. This perspective correction here is just as the name suggests, correction of the perspective, and we'll just leave it at that. No need to get into it today. These buttons right here will change the background of your image, and it's very useful. This is theme based according to whichever theme you specify here in the settings. There's a variety of themes you can use, and it's locked to the theme. These three are respectively black, gray, and white, and it's often useful to view your images on white background or a black background. These buttons here show just their respective color channels, and again, I'll leave this at that because it's way beyond the scope of this tutorial. Now, these two here, the focus mask and the contrast mask, are two very important but very complicated tools to use for an absolute beginner, and I will leave them be. I will, however, address these two because these clipping indicators are really useful. And let's pick this image, for instance. Now, clipping can either be clipping of the shadows or clipping of the highlights. That is to say, whenever there are parts of the image that are too bright and have lost information, also called overexposed, they are also called clipped. And you can click this button and the program will display the parts of the image where there is lost information, where it is overexposed. Now, I will show you ways to recover said highlights, and a lot of times you will be able to recover quite a lot of lost information, more so in the shadows than the highlights, but there is also a lot that can be done to rescue highlights. Correspondingly, this is used to show clipped shadows, just like here where you see parts of the image that are overexposed. Using the clipped shadow indicator, you are able to display parts of the image which are underexposed, which are below this zero line, which is to say clipped shadows. This is also useful because you might want to know how much of the shadows you want to recover. And I'll get into shadow recovery and highlight recovery in just a bit. I just want you to know that these buttons are the ones you use in order to check your clipped highlights and shadows. I will not even get into this because it has to do with profiles and it's really complicated stuff. These are rotation buttons and flipping buttons. These will flip your images horizontally or vertically, save current image, send the image to the processing queue. This will open the image in an external editor of your choice, be it GIMP or Photoshop or whatever else. This is where you choose profiles, color profiles, yet again, something I won't touch into it, nor will I talk about this, nor this, nor this. This is very complicated stuff to do with color calibration, print profiling, color gamuts, and whatnot. This will navigate your view. This part here is called the film strip, and it shows you the images in the current folder you are in, and you are able to navigate and move from one to the next using these buttons. This will synchronize, as the pop-up suggests, the file browser or the film strip with the editor to reveal the thumbnail of the currently opened image. Zooming in and out is done with these buttons here. This is a fit to screen tool. This is a fit to crop. Let's say we have cropped this part of the image. This is a fit to crop. This is a zoom in to 100%, and this is displayed right here. These are detail windows and very useful when you want to work with an image zoomed all the way at fit to screen view. And let's say you always want to keep an eye on the eye of the goose here, or the swan, I think, and the feather detail right here. You are able to open up to you are able to open a lot of detail views and have them all display different parts of the image. This is kind of preposterous, but it just goes to show what you are able to do. You can change their magnifications here individually. You can close all of them by just clicking on the X here. This is show hide all panels, very useful if you want to show or hide all panels at once. And we are done with the buttons surrounding the image viewer here. Next up, let's start actually processing the images. Right, so here we are at the meat and potatoes of this video, the actual processing part. The reason you're here, kindly excuse the long, winded road we had to take to get here, but I think it was necessary, almost mandatory, to take this thorough approach to the program, because on the one hand, this is intended for absolute beginners. On the other hand, without a prior, at the very least, basic understanding of some terms, you are bound to make mistakes, develop bad habits, or simply not even understand what is going on with your image. So, that said, we still need to define some terms before actually processing images, because while some may be readily apparent, like lightness is to do, of course, with lightness. I'm sorry to define a term by itself, but I'm just trying to make a point. It's very easy to understand just by the namesake of this slider. This, surely enough, affects lightness and brightness. Other terms, however, may be less obvious, like exposure compensation or highlight compression. Shadows and highlights, while in day-to-day tongue have a certain meaning, they have a similar meaning in photography, but things like vignettes and other terms we are going to define right now need a proper explanation in order for you to be able to better understand the workflow. Generally speaking, and I'm only going to touch upon the most usual, the most common of these, because it's an exercise in frustration and frankly futility to go through all of these sliders and all of these modules and all of these tabs here. It's so far beyond the scope of this tutorial, so we're not going to do it. We're just going to touch upon the very basic things you need to know. Exposure compensation generally is to be understood as overall brightness of the image. Now, we've also touched upon lightness. Now, in order to understand the difference between these two, the exposure compensation and lightness, is enough to show you how they work. This is minimum lightness and this is maximum lightness. This is minimum exposure and this is maximum exposure. You already start to see that the exposure compensation slider is a lot more heavy-handed. It can really darken up your image and really brighten it up to the point where it's pure white. While on the other hand, lightness has, and I'm just going to leave it at that because there are complexities that I won't address. It's basically a softer, more finer, more subtler approach to increasing or decreasing the overall brightness of your image. Moving on to the highlight compression slider, it sounds complicated and it actually is, but I'm trying to make it less so. It's, however, important to understand because this thing here, together with this highlight slider here, is a very important tool in RawTherapee. This is closely linked to highlight reconstruction here, because by itself it doesn't do a lot. When you activate highlight reconstruction, you start to see there is some filling in the blanks, some reconstruction of lost highlight details here. Now, this image is a bit overexposed, that is to say it has some clipped highlight. Now, clipping is when, for various reasons, usually too much or too little light or improper setting of your camera, pixel information in parts of the image is lost. For instance, here on the very edges on the wings here, you see it's just pure white. There is no detail here, there is no color, there is no sharpness, there is nothing. Basically, information here is lost. The sensor was too far pushed and it was unable to record any information here because these were the brightest parts of the image. I touched upon these indicators earlier and they are very useful for you to determine at a quick glance which parts of the image are overexposed or clipped. Sure enough, these parts are clipped. Now, software magic is so powerful that it is able to recover and reconstruct some lost information. Now, this is both true and not, because while on the one hand, if we click highlight reconstruction here, zoom into the overexposed parts of the wings here and raise the highlight compression slider, you begin to see that the program is kind of filling in the blanks and putting in information that was lost. But it's just an approximation. It's in reality incapable of inventing information where there was none. This is lost and it's lost forever. Anything that's clipped, it's not recorded information. However, the program will fill these parts here with some sort of an estimation of what needs to be there. And the method decides exactly how it estimates. Color propagation seems to be, to me at least, the most precise in guessing what was here in the first place. Now, it looks almost great if you zoom in really closely, you see there's still no detail here. But the program does such a good job of filling in the blanks that to the untrained eye, and even to the trained eye, a lot of times, and with proper processing, you are able to reconstruct quite a bit of lost information. The highlight slider here is also useful in the same manner. It does basically the same thing in a different way. If I turn the highlight slider, you see it starts to tone down the very bright parts of the image. However, it will not reconstruct highlights, only this does, this slider. This is useful in some other scenarios, most likely when you have bright skies, and this is much more useful when you're dealing with completely lost information. Moving on, the vignette is a tool you use in order to guide the viewer's attention towards your subject. If I exaggerate this setting a lot, taking it up to 11, you start to see what is happening. It's basically a darkening, or if we take it the other way, a brightening of the corners that will help guide your viewer's attention towards your subject. Now, there are settings here that have to do with how the vignette looks and handles, if it's round or square, but generally try to use this carefully and sparingly, because a very heavy-handed vignette is a sure sign of a newbie. So while you may be one, you want to try and develop good habits, and that is using your tools responsibly and not just cranking it up all the way to 11. A graduated filter is very similar to the vignette in the way that it is used to guide the viewer's attention towards your desired part of the image. Now, once the module is turned on or activated, you have to click this button in order to see the widget for the tool. Let's take the strength up really high, so it's very obvious what we are doing. The graduated filter darkens, or yet again lightens, parts of the image according to your specified direction and position. You can take this widget and tell the program that everything that's above the center line will be affected by the strength slider. If we take it to minus, it will be lightened. If we take it to plus, it will be darkened. The angle will also, by dragging the vertical line here, will adjust the angle of the tool. The center will adjust very obviously, so the center on a Y and on an X axis. This is useful when you want to darken, let's say, part of the sky or part of the ground. Feathering makes it so that the transition is very soft. You hardly ever want a very sudden, heavy-handed transition like this, so use high values for your feathering. See what it does? It just darkened the lower part of the image. Moving on to sharpening, that is the tool to add clarity and detail to an image. Like all other modules that have this one-to-one designation, this tool needs for the image to be zoomed in to 100% in order for the changes to be visible. Once activated, using the amount here, see the water drops here, how they gain a lot more clarity. Or the feathers on the swan here. This is useful when you want to add detail and clarity to your image. Moving on to noise reduction. This is very self-explanatory, and I'm going to choose another image because it's easier to see. Take a look here. Let's crank up the exposure a bit so you see. This is what we call noise. This grain here is usually what happens when there's not enough light, and it's much more apparent in darker parts of the image. Now, you can reduce a lot of this noise by simply turning this on. And if you will pay close attention, you will see that all these ugly color splotches simply go away, while the pattern remains. Now, you need to understand that there are two types of noise. There's what is called luma noise or luminance noise, and chrominance, otherwise known as chroma noise or color noise. I'll leave these at that because this is a very complex subject, but you need to simply understand that color noise is much, much more egregious and really much uglier than plain old luminance noise. And by just turning on the module here, you only eliminate the color noise. You can also grab this luminance slider and drag it to the right in order to eliminate the luminance noise, but usually that comes with the drawback of eliminating a lot of detail. See how everything becomes blurry? You want to use this sparingly and very responsibly, because you might on the one hand eliminate the noise in the image, but you will also be left with little to no actual detail in your image. So this is a dance of reducing noise and recovering detail with this slider here. So best practice until you become more proficient with processing is to just simply eliminate your color noise by turning this on and leaving the module at its default settings. Now let's quickly touch upon the Defringe module. It may sound intimidating, and it can be, but I'll try to keep it very simple. Now, one of many optical imperfections that you can see in your images is what we call fringing or chromatic aberrations. If you zoom in into your image, and it usually that is most apparent in high contrast areas of your image, usually where white meets a darker color, like here for instance, you see this green outline. It's called fringing. It can also be purple, it can also be magenta. It's usually either green or purple-ish. So in order to remove this, you use the Defringe module. Now, you may say there's nothing here, but once you zoom in, you already start to see this green outline, and it's really very apparent when you zoom in real close. It's also apparent in print, and it's usually just something you really want to avoid. So just zoom in to at least 100% in order to see the effects of this module. Let's go further in, so it's much easier to see, and turn this module on. Already you see the green outline has disappeared. It might not always be the case. You might need to tell the program what color the fringing is so it can know to eliminate that specific color. In order to do that, you have to open the module here and go to the curve section, open the equalizer using the drop-down menu here, and this is a color equalizer. Fret not, it's really simple to use. You just grab the point of the desired color you need to remove. In our case, it's green. So take the anchor here and drag it slightly higher and turn this on and off. I think it's really very apparent what is going on. We told the program to remove the green fringing of this image. You might say, what about this part? It's a bit on the cyan side. Grab the cyan and tell the program you need to remove some cyan fringing as well. And sure enough, it has cleaned up the image quite a lot. Moving on to the color tab, I will quickly touch upon white balance and give you some best practices, however, trying not to get in depth because it's a very complicated subject. The white balance of the image has to do with the color temperature of the light. This slider here, accurately called temperature, if dragged towards blue, will make the image have a cooler, bluer tint, and on the other side, it will make the image have a warmer, more orange-reddish tint. I will not get into the tint and blue-red equalizer tools because this is much finer work and it's not something you need to worry yourself with right now. Just understand that sometimes when your camera records an image, will not always correctly guess the color of the light. There are a lot of factors that will affect how warm or cool the image will come out. So you will sometimes need to correct the color balance or the white balance of your image. My recommendation, let's take it to camera, which is also known as shot. It's what the camera thought a good white balance, and it's how the image came out of the camera. Now, what I recommend is to simply use this drop-down menu and try one of the automatic modes or one of the preset modes here. If this was a sunny day, let's try and choose sunny. And sure enough, I think it's pretty good. You can also give one of the automatic modes a try. Like temperature correlation usually works very good. Also RGB gray, but not always. Usually I find temperature correlation to be more accurate. Or you can use the pick button here to specify to the program, read light here. And it's where the program will look for what you decide is white. So if there's any part in your image that you know for a fact that is either white or pure gray, use the pick button to activate the pipette here and simply click on the image. Then the program will have been told by you, this is 100% for sure white. Do your calculations according to this. If that doesn't work, you can use the temperature slider to manually adjust the color balance of the image. Just take it a little to the left, a little to the right. Do this funny dance like this until you're satisfied with the color balance of the image. I left out saturation because I want to address it together with vibrance. Now, while saturation will make all colors in your image pop, it will intensify the values of all colors in your image as a whole, making everything uniformly more punchy. Vibrance is a much more subtler tool, and it will only enhance the more muted tones in your image. See how the already bright red of the beak kind of stays the same, or at least it isn't affected as much as the more muted parts in the image. And saturation also has the downside of being able to clip colors. See how badly it messed up the blues in the image here? The vibrance will not be able to clip so readily because it's a much more subtler tool. The main difference you need to understand is that saturation will enhance all colors in your image uniformly, while vibrance will only enhance the more muted colors. There are a few things we need to touch upon in the transform panel, and first up is the crop tool. Enable the module here, and you will see a dotted outline has appeared all around our image. You can either grab any of the sides or corners to crop or cut in to your image, or use these values here, but it's really much easier to use the selection here. A very important thing to mention here is that inside the guide type dropdown, there are some widgets, some guides, let's call them. And out of them, I would really recommend trying the rule of thirds when you do your cropping, because generally it's very pleasing if you situate your subject at one of these 4 intersections here. And if you have horizons in your image, they should be either on the lower or upper third of the image, and try to avoid center placements like this. It's usually a lot better for you to situate your subject slightly on one side, and usually leaving more space towards where the subject is looking, in our case down this part. Now, in order to move your selection, you have to hold down Shift and grab the box and move it anywhere you want. If you don't hold Shift, you will move the entire image like this. So hold down Shift and move your selection something like this. If you want to hide your widget, just choose None here in the guide type. Press F to center the view to the cropped area, and this is a much better crop than how the image was initially made, getting rid of the copious amounts of distraction here and here. Moving on to the rotate part here, you can use this slider to rotate your image. Finally, it's only been 47 years since we started this tutorial, and it's just now that we've come to the part that was of actual interest to you, the post-processing. Let's start with this image. It's a good use case scenario for a lot of things we're going to do to this image. First up, there's a lot of things we did here. So in order to reset the image to its initial state, we can either scroll all the way up and click on Photo Loaded, or safer still, because Photo Loaded might imply other edits we did in a previous session. You need to go here where it says Processing Profiles. Now it's set to Custom, and choose Neutral. And sure enough, you see that Photo Loaded still had some edits. Neutral is just the very raw file, this case an NEF, a Nikon image. Now, we have the image in its neutral state. There has been nothing done to it. I recommend going to the RAW tab here and just enabling Capture Sharpening. This will have the effect of adding a bit of extra sharpness and detail and clarity to the image. Just enable it and forget about it. Move back to the Exposure tab, and first up, let's evaluate our image. Let's see how it is and what we'd like to do. I have already identified a few, I wouldn't call them flaws, just things I want to address. First up is this corner here is of no help to the image, nor is this. The reeds here just make for distraction, for noise and clutter. It's not something that adds to the image, it just detracts and distracts. So first up, actually, scratch that. Let's go to the Transform tab, open up the Crop module, enable it, choose Rule of Thirds guide for the crop, and let's crop our image so that we're left with a much nicer composition. I also don't like what seems to be the edge of some vegetation starting from here, and I think it just makes for distractions. Let's drag this corner and get rid of that. Drag this corner and get rid of this here. I think it's safer that we do quite more cropping because we need to enhance our subject here and have it be the central part of the image. Now, I think this is enough. Hold down Shift and move our selection about this. allowing it slightly more space in the direction it's looking, or rather traveling. Press F or this button here, fit image. Press F or this button here, fit to crop, so that the cropped part of the image is centered. Now, make sure you hide your guides because it can distract you. And there's still some reeds here, which I think is really something we can ignore. Perhaps the subject of another tutorial, you can clone this out, use some more advanced tools to erase these here, but I think we're going to get away with it and just use a vignette. Now, I want to rotate the image a little. I think it seems a little nose heavy, so I want to grab the rotate slider and take it to the right a little, making for a more balanced image. Something like this. Well, I didn't mention it earlier. I do want to mention it now. Profiled lens correction is something you need to consider doing to every image because it's basically automatic. It's free in the way that you just click automatically selected, and the program will look in the EXIF information of your image, search for the camera and specific lens you used, and it will apply some corrections to your image. If you click on none, you see the effect. Choose automatically selected and let the program do its thing. Now, go back to the exposure tab. And another thing I want to address in this image is the brightness or lack thereof. We need at least, I think, a stop. Let's just type 1 here, or use the slider to take the brightness 1 stop higher. I would also like some more contrast, so use this slider here and give it quite a bit more contrast. A bit more saturation. A vignette, but not quite so obvious at that. Before and after. Some sharpening. Turn your modules on. Grab the zoom into 100%. Grab the amount slider and take it to the right, slightly to the right. Always double check your modules, turn them on and off and see what you're working with. Let's defringe the image and see the program thought it needs to defringe by eliminating purple. However, this is not the case, so we reset this by clicking on this arrow here, and these arrows always reset all sliders and modules to their default values. Now we need to eliminate the green fringing, so grab the green. Also, make sure the module is enabled. Grab the green, raise it until you see the fringing gone. Zoom out to fit. And let's try the white balance. Try the pick. Choose a spot here for the program to interpret the white balance of the image. I think this is good. Enable the vibrance and just ever so slightly give it a bit more vibrance. It's noticeable, but it's not over the top. And we're basically done with this image. Let's check for clipping. No clipping on the shadows. No clipping on the highlights. So that tells me there's still a bit more brightness we can introduce. And this time let's use the lightness slider, which kind of robs us of contrast. So we need to introduce a bit more contrast. I think this is pretty good. Let's try before and after. This is our processed image, and this is where we chose neutral, the unprocessed image. There's quite a bit of difference. The image is much more beautiful. Now, in order to save or export image, we can either click on this icon here and individually export each image we work with, or just use this button, which will send it to the queue, in order for the entire queue to be processed at a later time. Let's try and recover some detail here, because I feel like there's too much white and not enough detail. And in order to do that, we're going to use the highlight slider and zoom out to fit, and just barely, because you see what happens if you take it all the way. It does introduce a lot of detail. At the same time, it robs the image of this beautiful and natural glow. So just very slightly take this to the right. You can also use the tonal width, which will tell the program where, or rather, how much of the highlights it will tone down. So for the sake of the example, let's take it all the way to the right. With the tonal width at its default value, it will also affect parts around the swan here. If we take this to the right a little, it will tell the program to only diminish highlights in the very brightest parts of the image. So take this back down to the left until you see this slider starting to affect parts of the image. We do not want, so leave it at around this value and tone down highlights like this. There is still that natural, beautiful glow to the image, but we made obvious quite a lot of detail in the feathers here. Even too much, I think. We are still losing a lot of that natural, beautiful glow, so I'm going to tone it down quite a bit. And this is a good rule of thumb. Whenever you feel like the value is right, just tone it down a notch. Take it back down like 10 or 20%, because usually, and especially when you process for a long time, you can develop tunnel vision and really go to work on your image and take it somewhere where it no longer even looks nice. You can go overboard and over the top very easily, especially in the beginning when you're not very sure of your actions. This image has been altered since we added it to the queue. So we need to add it to the queue again, because if not, the program would have exported the prior version of the image before we worked on the highlights. So send it to the queue again. And let's move on to this next image of the swan. Make sure to work on a neutral, unprocessed image. And this is a good example of how to use the straighten horizon line. Grab this tool here and drag a line designating your horizon. The program will straighten your image, making sure the horizon is straight, and that is something you basically always want to make sure, that you have a straight horizon. Let's work on the crop a little. Let's choose a rule of thirds guide again and crop in really tight, because we don't basically need anything other than the goose. Hold shift and move your selection like this, and notice how I placed the head of the swan here, right at the very intersection of these lines here. Let's hide our guide, zoom in to fit, and let's start working on the image. We forgot to enable capture sharpening, so let's do that now. Go back to the exposure tab and let's evaluate the image. The image is sufficiently bright for now. We have some clipped highlights and very little in the way of contrast and saturation. The image is very flat and dull. So let's first enable highlight reconstruction, grab the highlight compression and take it around a third to the right, which basically kind of did all right. Now, introduce some contrast, bit of saturation, not too much because the image is already kind of yellow, which brings us to the white balance. This time let's try an automatic mode like temperature correlation I don't like it. RGB gray, no. Let's try the daylight sunny. And yeah, I guess the image is taken right before sunset, so it's bound to be warm, but not quite this warm. So let's use the temperature slider to tone it down a little, maybe something like this. Go back to the exposure tab and choose a vignette, tone it down a bit. I would like to darken the upper parts of the image because it kind of steals the attention. Now, human vision tends to natural favor and has a preference for bright spots. So we want the swan to be the bright spot in the image. So we're going to use the graduated filter to darken the upper part of the image. Let's turn the widget on, grab this and tell it that everything that's underneath here will not need to be affected, just the upper part here. Turn it back off and let's see what this does. Yeah, it basically just works on the part here designated by the widget. It has a bit of spillover and that has to do with the feathering. And let's diminish the feathering. Something like this, hide the widget, take this down. This is nothing, and this is some. Already, before and after, already we begin to see that the bright parts of the image, which is to say the swan, is the center part, the most important thing, the subject in this image. Let's activate the sharpening. Zoom in to 1:1. Give it some sharpness. And let's check for fringing. Sure enough, there is fringing of the purple variety here. Turn on the module and by default it's set to purple fringing. So let's also try and get rid of some of the blue fringing. That does nothing, so let's not. Something like this. Add some vibrance, just 2 or 3 units, and basically we're left with what I think is a good image. However, I would also try some more brightness, like something like this, and a bit more contrast. Let's check for clipping. No clipping here, no clipping here. I think we have ourselves a pretty good image. Now let's work on this third image of a swan. Let's crop it, activate the rule of thirds. It's already pretty well composed, so just something like this I think is fine. Maybe a bit tighter still. We always forget the capture sharpening, so enable that. We're done with cropping. Let's choose the automatically selected profile correction. Let's go to the white balance module. Pick a part that we know to be white and set a custom white balance. Go to the exposure tab, fit to screen. Grab the exposure slider and take it quite some ways to the right. Introduce some contrast, some saturation. We're probably clipping here a little, so yeah. Enable highlight reconstruction and highlight compression here. Just a bit seems to fix the problem, just the tiniest amount. Also use this to introduce some detail in the wings here. Not a lot, because we're going to lose out on that wonderful natural glow that comes with highlights. Activate the vignette, tone it down a little. Always remember to turn your modules on and off repeatedly to see what you're doing. Sharpening, activate the module, zoom into 1:1, pick a part where detail is easy to notice, and grab the amount slider and take it somewhat generously to the right, on and off, on and off. Turn on noise reduction, and let's see if there's any fringing we need to fix. There doesn't seem to be any fringing in this image, so we're just going to leave it at that. In the color tab, turn on the Vibrance module, give it just 2-3 units of vibrance, and basically be done with it. Add this to the queue. Also add this to the queue because we forgot to. And these 3 images basically serve as examples of wildlife photography. And now let's also try a bit of black and white processing of a street scene. And I should have mentioned that these 3 images are not taken by me. They are shot by my brother. Now we're going to basically treat them the same. Activate capture sharpening. Activate our cropping tool, choose a rule of thirds guide, and evaluate if we need the entire frame. So we basically kind of want to crop in a little to eliminate this part here, which I find distracting. Take the frame and drag it slightly upwards. Hide the widget. Fit the image to screen. Go to the color tab and let's make this black and white. Just simply click here on the black and white tool and the program will automatically make it black and white. There's certainly a lot more you can do here. There's several methods of making an image black and white, but that's beyond the scope of this tutorial, so we're not going to address that. As far as the exposure of the image, it's really easy to see it's severely underexposed, so we're just going to give it 2 stops more exposure. I think that's a bit too much, so let's make it 1.5. Some contrast, quite a bit more contrast. I don't think we need to work on highlights because these lamps here are supposed to be very bright, so there's nothing in the way of necessary or valuable detail that we're going to recover here. Maybe a bit of vignette, not quite so much, so let's tone it down a little. Some sharpening is perhaps in order. Let's activate the module. Grab the slider and take it to the right a little. Let's check here. Yes, I think that seems to be fine. Some noise reduction. We don't need to bother ourselves with the defringe because since we're talking about a black and white image, there's not going to be any color fringing. So we're just going to leave it at that. Neither will we bother with vibrance and saturation because we're talking about black and white. So we're just going to basically call it done. Maybe let's try and raise the shadows a bit. I feel like this part here is way too dark, and while it needs to be dark because it's in the shadow, I like to reveal a bit of detail here. So let's grab the shadow slider and lift up, or rather open up the shadows a lot. However, we begin to notice that this affects the entire image and we might not want that. We need to tell the program to only look in the very darkest of spots. So we need to take the tonal width all the way to the left. So the program will only open up the very darkest parts of the image and leave everything that's slightly brighter alone. On and off, you see just the very darkest parts of the image have been brightened up. And basically we can call it done and add it to the queue. Finally, let's take this image and be sure to go to a neutral state. This is a good example of a kind of like a landscape scenario where the shadows are severely underexposed. There is However, a lot of information here. So let's enable capture sharpening. Let's enable profile lens correction, automatically selected. The crop, I think, will remain unchanged. Let's just use the straighten horizon tool and pick this rooftop as our horizon. Straighten it up like this. Go to the exposure tab, and you might be tempted to just go for the exposure slider and take it all the way up. However, we begin to notice we're losing a lot of this glorious color and detail in the sky. So we just want to do this very, very slightly, like just 0.4, and only work on the shadows. Enable the shadows highlights module and grab the shadow slider and take it to the right. It has sort of like the same effect as the exposure compensation slider here, affecting parts of the image we don't want affected. We want to leave the sky alone. So we need to take the tonal width slider all the way to the left. And now, see, it will only brighten up the very darkest parts of the image. We will not go all the way to the right like this because it looks really bad. And this is an image taken very early before sunrise. So it should be somewhat dark, however, not quite that dark that you don't see any details. So open up your shadows quite a bit. Maybe like this. Some contrast maybe. A bit of lightness. Some more contrast. A bit of saturation, because we want to enhance the colors in the sky. No need for a vignette, because there's no one subject to this image. Basically, the subject is the sky. So we're not going to use the vignette. You don't always need to use it. Let's sharpen up the image a bit. Choose noise reduction to get rid of the very ugliest color noise. Give it a bit more vibrance, and we're basically done with it. Let's just check before and after. Neutral state, after. Add it to the queue. Now, if you want to export all these images at once, that is to say, process the entire queue, you need to pick a folder as a destination. Let's say you want to send them to your pictures folder or wherever else. Just choose your folder. I'm going to choose pictures, raw 2024, RawTherapee tooth. This is my working folder for the tutorial. Open the folder and just fire up the queue. The program will go ahead and export all images in the queue one by one. Which brings us to the end of this tutorial. Now, this has been all. I'm hoping I have been of some help. Before wrapping things up, if at any point you thought I have been unnecessarily vague, or if I glanced upon things that you maybe thought I should have spent a little more time on and perhaps gone a bit more in depth, or on the contrary, if you feel like at some point I've been dense in my way of explaining things, maybe if you felt like I've gone into the deep end and you wish I had better explained or explained in simpler terms, go ahead and use the comment section down below and ask me to elaborate, ask me to explain things I perhaps didn't explain as good as you might have wanted in this video. Basically, just use the comment section down below to ask any questions you might have. Maybe there's something I missed. That out of the way, I have been Radu, and I'm really hoping this has been at least somewhat enjoyable, or if not, maybe just helpful. I'll settle with that. Until next time, this has been Radu for 1,000 words with an absolute beginner's guide to raw therapy, and I bid you farewell.